All right, last installment, we are discussing the relationships that establish the working order in an ecosystem. So we call organism relationships. And yeah, I know you've seen some of these, but these are really the fun part of ecology. So first, we want to talk about the energy pyramid. You can see this is a kind of a model that's typically used to represent the feeding relationships in an ecosystem. You can see that at the bottom we call them producers or primary producers, but these are the photosynthesizers in an ecosystem, and the bottom of the pyramid is a lot larger and represents larger populations than the consumers. And as we begin to move up in consumers, much like we when we talked about the wolf, or you read about the wolf example in Yellowstone, that the plants, you have to have a lot of plants to support the ecosystem and support organisms within that ecosystem, and the fewest numbers are going to be at the very top. So we've got organisms sorted into their trophic levels, and so pay attention to those names. Tertiary consumer represented there is an owl. The owl will get its energy. Um, what do we got? Like a little lizard and a rat from the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers get their energy from the primary consumers, and it's not always as clean, right? And then the primary consumers get their energy from the producers, and so the whole pyramid model is based on those feeding relationships. So we call this a trophic pyramid because it has to do with feeding. And like I said, greater numbers of organisms are found at the lower levels, and then you only get a few of those. What we tertiary um, sometimes will be referred to, like in this case, as the apex predator. So like the wolf is the apex predator in our Yellowstone example as well. All right, so let's kind of go back to this idea of energy, right? The the thing that you must have learned, I'm hoping, that really determines that energy can't be created or destroyed, and so it's got to constantly be flowing through it. The energy can't really cycle; it's just going to flow straight through it. The first law of thermodynamics states energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can be transferred from one organism to another, but the thing about transferring energy is that energy is also used by these organisms, and when that energy is being used to produce body heat or to help them move around. They got to look for food. It requires energy just to be like breathing, living, looking around, right? So that energy um, gets lost along the way, and every time it's just the principle of transfer of energy within physical science. Anytime energy is being transferred from one form to another, there's going to be a loss. The least efficient systems are going to lose a lot more energy, and when we say lost energy, that is energy that gets lost as heat. So, for instance, a bicycle is one of the most efficient uses of energy for your own transportation, but even a bicycle experiences loss to friction on the tires on the ground, and loss to gears, um, or the pedals, like the rotation of the metal within another metal, that there's some heat that's lost even in a bicycle, even when it's all greased up and working perfectly. Let's say you get just a little, um, the gear gets a little bit off, and you lose some friction and you lose some efficiency to something that's misaligned. Every transfer in energy, whatever the system is, there's never ever going to be a perfect transfer of energy. And in energy systems, when we look at ecosystems, there's a big loss. So within living systems, because we do have to use energy for life functions, the energy that is available at each level is only transferred by about 10%. So energy, um, we think of energy in the form of chemical energy within living systems. We start with the sun, goes through the sun. Plants use photosynthesis. They capture that energy and they transfer that, what we would call light energy, transfer that and capture that energy in the form of sugars. Now it is chemical. It's chemical energy, right? And organisms can eat that. So we consume that, and then that energy is available to be used to build bodies, but also to help, like, you breathe and you think and to move around, all of that. Well, 90% of the energy is lost. Some of it's, just given off as heat. Some of it stays undigested. It's given off as waste. But 90% is not used. So we have a super inefficient system when it comes to the transfer of energy as biological beings. But it makes for really beautiful systems. So, but this is a principle that you need to memorize and understand. Is that you're only going to see about 10% of the biomass represented at each level exchange. All right, so the fun part. We talked a little bit about some of these in some of your notes, but some of the relationships that happen within systems, ecosystems, where there are feeding relationships, some of these relationships are so that those transfers of energy are more efficient. Organisms in pursuit of survival, as we know, like survival of the fittest, right? Like fitness, not in terms of like physical fitness, but how an organism actually fits into their system. Organisms over time, part of the evolutionary adjustment is that they're going to work to have more efficient interactions. And if a particular organism that they live around and interact with creates a situation that makes it more efficient for both of them to live, then they typically do live very closely together. And that relationship where two species are living in very close contact for some part of their lives is referred to as symbiotic. Bio meaning life and sim meaning together, life together. So one of the more famous ones is mutualism. This is where it benefits both of those organisms. Mutualism is a relationship where it's good for one and good for the other, whatever that interaction is. So this is actually a picture, the example on the slide, a sea anemone and a clownfish. And the relationship that they have with one another is what we would call a mutualistic relationship. So the anemone provides protection for the clownfish, and the clownfish keeps the anemone clean by eating parasites off of the anemone. Now there is some adaptations that have happened over the evolutionary life of those organisms so that they work together, but there was a mutual benefit for them to be able to exist in that situation, and it created more efficiency for their survival, and therefore the outcome is what we would call a mutualistic relationship. And there you go. There's your details for your notes as this particular example. I want you to think of another example yourself of an example of mutualism. I know we went through some of these in our targets, and so getting this down in notes, this is a little bit of review here. All right, commensalism, one organism benefits and the other is unaffected. All right, but once again, we're talking about energy now. So from an energy standpoint, if it doesn't demand extra energy for an organism to provide a benefit, just that its life function somehow provides a benefit for another organism and increases their survival, then that adaptation becomes part of their behavior and part of their niche. So example here, tree frogs using a plant as protection. Another relationship that we've discussed is parasitism and then predation. Both of these, one population or one organism is harmed while the other benefits, like fleas or ticks living off the blood of a host animal, or like predation, owls hunting mice. So you can see this is a really good little chart. Go ahead and fill in your spot that kind of talks about benefit, neutral, and harm, and what the organisms are. So like you think about like pick an organism and see, you know, like one side the X or the columns and the rows. Basically, if you think of it, the organism relationship, if it's a benefit and benefit, we call that mutualism. If it's a benefit and neutral to one, it's commensalism. Or if it's a benefit for one and harm for the other, parasitism. And or moving down, neutral and benefit. So you can see this is like a little table, like a, what's it called? The multiplication table, where you can see, you read the, here, let me grab this. Read here and here. So if it's harm for one and neutral for the other, you can figure out what that would be called. And so just reading sometimes about interactions between organisms will give you a little bit of insight on. Okay, so in summary, organisms are sorted into trophic levels based on where they fit, what they eat, and how they get their energy and how that flows through. And then we know energy can be transferred in trophic relationships. And then we have categorized organisms when there is a really close relationship between two organisms. Those are called symbiotic relationships, and those are categorized basically according to how they interact, whether it's beneficial or harmful or neutral to each of those organisms. So get familiar with those terms. Think of some examples and add to your notes. I know this one's super short, but really, as it's reviewed, we're good.